All right, we are at 42 folks joining us, and it is 1:01. So in the interest of everyone's time, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. On behalf of the IRIS Center, I am excited to welcome you to our very first prep talk just for college and university teacher education faculty. My name is Jordan Lukens. I work with the IRIS Center and I'm also an assistant teaching professor at North Carolina State University. Today, we are thrilled to be partnered with the Progress Center to help connect you with some of their resources that you can use right away in your coursework to support your students in IEP development. Before I turn it over to the Progress Center folks, just a couple of housekeeping items. As far as our agenda for today, the Progress Center is going to share with us for about 10 minutes, and then we'll open up the floor for some discussion and questions. At about 1:25 Eastern time, my time, 12:25 Central, we will wrap up and share some final information, but then we're going to keep the Zoom open for another 30 minutes or so for anyone who wants to stay on and continue the conversation. We are recording this session to share with those who were unable to join us live, and we plan to post the recording of the presentation from the Progress Center on our YouTube channel, but not the group discussion afterwards. So please share freely during that time. And now I will turn it over to Donna Sacco and Shaylyn Quinn from the Progress Center.
Thank you for that introduction, Jordan. Good morning from outside of Arizona. I am joined today by Donna, and as Jordan mentioned, we are representing the Progress Center, and we're putting the link to the Progress Center's website in the chat right now. For those of you who don't know us, we are so glad to have you here today. The Progress Center was funded by OSEP back in 2019, largely in response to the Andrew F. Supreme Court decision, which states that an IEP must be reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. So the center has really made it its mission to provide information, resources, technical assistance services to really support educators in developing and implementing high quality educational programs. And our next slide.
And it's not moving. 1 second. There we go.
Wonderful, thank you. So at the Progress Center, we believe that when educators collaborate with students and families in the development of technically sound and educationally meaningful programming, and then we implement that programming using effective practices for instruction and service delivery, that we really ensure that students have access to FAPE and improved outcomes. So you might see here we have that multiplication sign in our formula, and that's really intentional, right? So how many of you have seen a really great IEP or educational program developed for a student that's never fully implemented? Or maybe you had to implement something that was not well developed. If either of those two are missing, we won't see the improved access and outcomes or ultimately progress, right? So anything multiplied by 0 is 0. And then looking at the IDEA FAPE requirements, I want you to think a minute about the special education programming provided to students with disabilities in the schools and districts around the country that your students and teacher prep programs will be entering into. And they can almost certainly plan on hearing the following. I know that I have in my practicum experiences as a graduate student in school psychology, were timelines met? Was the parent given procedural safeguards? Did we get all those signatures? And these are really important questions for the procedural requirements as outlined in IDEA. And again, these procedural requirements are important to ensure that the IEP process was followed and all of those required components are there. Did we develop an IEP that was considered technically sound? But special education can all too easily become synonymous with compliance, right? So focusing on compliance or the procedural requirements, it might allow us to check all of those boxes and develop a technically sound IEP, but not necessarily to fulfill the broader purpose of special education as defined by IDEA and the Andrew decision. When we look more closely at the IDEA requirements related to providing FAPE, we can see that IDEA and the Andrew F. Supreme Court decision make it really clear that, those procedural requirements, those are important, but we also need to ensure that the development of the IEP enables the child to make progress and is considered educationally meaningful. And so that's the substantive requirement and kind of really where we want to focus today. How can we encourage new teachers to develop educationally meaningful IEPs? And then the third consideration, when determining FAPE, that focuses on implementation, right? So ensuring that services and supports outlined in the IEP are implemented as developed and as agreed upon. And so together, all three of these requirements help ensure that students with disabilities have access to FAPE through the development and implementation of their IEP. And so I want you to pause for a moment now to reflect on your own course instruction. And if maybe you're joining us from a district role, you can kind of think about the new teachers coming into your districts and think which of these three areas are you more likely to focus on, or which of these three areas maybe you're seeing the greatest training as new teachers coming into your district. And what we're going to do is a chatterfall. So to do a chatterfall, I want you to think about the answer to this question and type it in the chat box, but don't press enter yet. We're all going to wait until the count of 3 and press enter at the same time and kind of see where we're all at. So again, as you're pulling up your chat and you're typing, we're thinking about which of these three areas are you more likely to focus on in your course instruction. So I'll give you just a moment and hold off on pressing enter until I count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Go ahead. No problem at all. All right. I'm seeing a really big variety, which is great. I'm seeing a lot of substantive, procedural implementation. So we have a variety in terms of where you all are focusing, and that kind of gives us a nice segue into our kind of the focus of our prep talk today. So I'll hand it over to Donna, and she'll discuss how an emphasis on alignment can really beef up that substantive instruction in your courses, and how the Progress Centers and also the IRIS Centers resources can really assist with this.
Thanks so much, Shay. So what we want to emphasize here is, much like the IRIS Center, we at Progress Center have some tools to help you deliver this material to students. And we're providing you with an idea of the way we talk about the IEP, first from the federal law requirements of IDEA, and then those things that enhance the IEP. We're not going to talk at you this whole time. We're going to open this later on for a dialogue, because we want to hear what you're saying. But as you can see from your own responses, people are all over the board in terms of the three areas. We know how important it is to develop that procedurally sound IEP and to provide sound instruction for pre-service teachers on IEP development. But let's tease this apart a little bit more. We can think about the IEP as a collection of parts, much like these bike parts. Similar to the illustration here, which shows the required parts of a bike: the wheel, the frame, the handlebars, seat, pedals, chain, all of those things. And the IEP must include these things as well, such as the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, the measurable annual goals, the statement of special education statement services, monitoring plan, date, frequency, duration, location of services. Like, you get the idea, right? There are other things that can be added to the IEP to enhance it, or the bike in this example, but they're not legally required. When developing that IEP, educators often focus on completing parts or sections by following a form or an online template, and they work through those present levels section or the goals pages or the accommodations table to ensure that all the sections are completed. But focusing on completing sections and viewing the IEP as paperwork, as so often is the case, places compliance as the end result. That's the procedural. But when we're talking about this, what makes this bike function is when all its parts work together, or are aligned in a way that will move us toward progress. And that's what we think of as the substantive requirements. The wheels connect well to the frame, which connects to the handlebars and the pedals. It's the collection of all of those aligned parts that provide us with a well-designed bike. So it's similar to the IEP. In well-designed IEPs, there's a direct relationship between the PLAAFPs and the other components of the IEPs. The PLAAFPs identify the student's needs and provide the baseline for measure. Ooh, that's funny. My computer just went bonkers. I think you might be seeing a funny picture there. Ooh, sorry about that. I don't know what happened to the quality, but you get the idea that each of those different pieces, when they work together and aligned, then that's when we get that substantive part of the IEP. So it's a tricky thing with pre-service teachers. They're completing course requirements, and this IEP doesn't make a lot of sense until they're in the field. And at that time, they may forget what they learned in your course. So the way we look at it is our resources can be carried with your students when they begin their professional careers. I used to have my students create a binder of resources for developing IEPs that might include handouts from the IRIS Center, other OSEP-funded centers that we rely on. I was teaching at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. I frequently used a national center called the Exceptional Children's Acceptance Center, which is a parent center in North Carolina. They have offs and tools as well. But for right now, I'm going to focus on the PLAAFP. And as one element of the IEP today, and just show you some of the resources we have. This page here shows our IEP tip sheets. These are, two-sided one-pagers. They're awesome. And so we have one on the PLAAFPs, and it gives you, it's quick design, easy to hand out. And then this aligns with an additional resource from our learning module on the PLAAFP. It's a 30-minute module with checks for understanding and a certificate of completion. So when I taught at UNCC, I used a flipped classroom approach with an active learning classroom. So I often provided resources and videos as homework, usually from the IRIS Center, before Progress Center started. So students would complete those before class, so that then in class we could actively work on writing IEP sections. So let's go back to that PLAAFP for a minute. Within the module, as well as that handout, we talk about, just like that illustration of the bike parts, the IDEA regulations mandate that every IEP must include these 7 requirements. So according to the Department of Ed, there should be a direct relationship between the present levels of performance and other components of the IEP. So if the statement describes a problem with the child's reading level and points to a deficit in reading skills, the problem should be addressed under both goals and specific special education related services provided to the child. So one of the things that the tip sheet points out are these 4 essential elements for the PLAAFP statement, that it's the starting point. It needs to be comprehensive and detailed enough so that the team can set appropriate, ambitious goals in light of the child's circumstances. Remember that end your decision, and plan appropriate supports and instruction and services. Each annual IEP goal should be directly linked, and the PLAAFP statement should provide justification for each support service that the student will receive as a part of that IEP. So IDEA regulations do not really specify the exact structure of the PLAAFP, but the IEP team can begin the process of developing that really high quality PLAAFP statement by focusing on these 4 essential elements: the student needs, the effect on progress in general education. Whoop. My computer is not behaving today. The baseline information, the connection to goals or services. So often as I'm entering the field and delivering PD to in-service teachers and school systems, I find that writing objective goals, using data, aligning the PLAAFPs, all of these are aspects of the IEP that are sometimes really tricky when we're out in the field. I'm going to pass it to Shay so she can talk about some of our other resources, I wanted to just center in on how you can use our resources related to the PLAAFP, but she's going to tell you about some of our other resources.
Absolutely. I first just want to give kind of a graduate student perspective too on the tip sheets and the module that Donna just shared. I actually, you won't be able to see it with the blur, but I have my tip sheets in my resource binder right now. I've shared these with my cohort of fellow school psychologists as, people who are involved in the IEP team meeting, but not necessarily provided explicit instruction in IEP development. And I think that these are great to start kind of neutral conversations about the quality of IEPs too. Going into a site, you can kind of take this and say, oh, do we have these 4 critical elements within our PLAAFP? In terms of the module, there is a certificate of completion that students can pass in. I think that's great for accountability for students. And just, it's really nice to have kind of a mix up of, the format. So not just a chapter or a journal article. Progress took that and kind of packaged it in an interactive way. We do also have a webinar recording archived on the website regarding PLAAFPs, and unfortunately you'll hear more of my voice on there, but you'll also get to hear from Dr. David Bateman, who is our center advisor and a former due process hearing officer, and Dr. Shannon Harmon, who is a practicing school psychologist in Chambersburg area school district. So that webinar, could be used in coursework, but also from the instructor lens, just kind of looking into more examples, non-examples, and potential kind of case studies to use in class. But for more, and I see Donna,
Sorry, I'm not sure how the funkiness of my computer, what's happening, but hopefully.
No worries. Basically, here we go. Okay, so on our website, we have a ton of resources that are already out there for you, but I recommend you sign up for our newsletter because we have so many great resources in the works. We have a special education law 3-module series that would be great for students. We're developing some parent resources that students could learn to utilize and take with them into the field. So definitely sign up for the newsletter to kind of stay in the loop regarding all of those new releases. And then I'll also pass it over to Jordan, who can share some of the really relevant IRIS resources as well. But first, I want to give a quick plug for our webinar next week on Thursday with Dr. Eric Carter. We do have a webinar, 10 Ways Schools Can Foster Belonging Among Students with and Without Disabilities, in case any of you would like to register and or share this with your students. So thank you again, and I'll hand it over to Jordan now.
Yay.
Thanks, Donna and Shaylyn. In just a moment, we will open the floor up for questions. I think we're going to do a little turn and talk first. But in the chat, we are adding a handout. I know we've been dropping links. You've been opening them, saving all those tabs. But to make it a little easier for you, we have created a handout with some direct links to the IEP resources highlighted from Progress Center. And we've also added on there 3 specific IRIS resources that really tailor really nicely alongside the Progress Center resources. So you'll see our full online training module on IEPs and 2 information briefs on common errors in IEPs, as well as the least restrictive environment statement. So we hope that you'll find these useful for supporting your instruction and equipping your teacher candidates with those really user-friendly resources that, just like Donna said, they can take with them and use throughout their careers. It really goes beyond just something that they're reading for class. So Donna, I will send it back over to you to get us started for some discussion.
Thanks so much. And I'm just looking at this list of people. I see so many friends out there and people giving me advice on how to handle my crazy screen and what's happening. I never turn my computer off. I think that's it. Thanks, Kathy, for that tip. Anyway, we are going to go into these breakout rooms. We're going to divide up into groups of probably 5 or so each. And it's going to be like speed dating, turn and talk. So be real quick. Share how might you utilize our resources from Progress Center. So when we break out there, just real quickly share how you can use it in your class, how might you apply it in your IEP class, or maybe those law modules or anything from our Progress Center. So let's go ahead and send you to breakout rooms.